The prize calf bolted sideways, and Isabella Bennett hit the dirt hard, 1 second from being trampled at the Dry Creek County Fair. June heat baked the Nebraska prairie to white dust and short tempers, and the 1887 County Fair drew every rancher and drifter within 50 miles to gamble what little they had left. Isabella rolled to her feet before the crowd could gasp, her Choctaw father's training keeping her quick, her mother's New England backbone keeping her chin high. The man who'd caught the calf's rope stood between her and the animal, his dark eyes steady as river stone.
"You hurt?"
His voice carried no panic, just calm assessment.
"I'm fine. That rope snapped on purpose."
She pointed at the frayed end dangling from the fence post, cut clean halfway through and left to fail.
"Someone rigged this."
He turned to scan the crowd, then looked back at her with something like recognition.
"You're Bennett's daughter, the one who tracks her father's old trade routes."
"And you're Stephen Pierce, the Shoshone guide who told my uncle's land offer to go to hell last spring."
She dusted off her shawl and met his gaze without flinching.
"Why are you at a cattle contest if you don't deal in livestock?"
"Because I heard Graves Calhoun was running the auction tonight, and when a railroad paymaster shows up at a rancher's fair, someone's about to lose their land."
The name hit her like a fist. Calhoun was the man her father had warned her about 3 weeks before he died. The man who smiled with a gold tooth and stole wages before payday to buy up deeds at auction.
"He's here now?"
"Behind the main tent, setting up his table."
Stephen stepped closer, his voice dropping.
"If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, don't go alone."
"I'm not asking for help."
"Good, because I'm not offering. I'm telling you I'm coming with you whether you like it or not."
She wanted to argue, but the crowd was starting to notice the cut rope, and a man in a dark suit was already walking toward them from the tent line, his smile flashing gold in the sun.
"That's him."
"Then we move. Now."
He took her wrist, not rough but firm, and pulled her through the gap between 2 wagons before Calhoun could reach them. They ducked under a tent flap and into the shade of the livestock pavilion, where the air smelled like hay and sweat.
"You can let go now."
"Not until we're clear of the fairgrounds. He saw your face."
She hated that he was right. They wove through the rows of penned horses and cattle, Stephen keeping his hand on her elbow to steer her past clusters of ranchers and their families. A woman selling ribbon candy called out a price, and a fiddler tuned up near the dance platform. But Isabella's pulse hammered too loud to hear the music. They reached the back edge of the fair, where the tents gave way to open prairie, and Stephen finally released her.
"He'll come after you now. Whatever you know, he thinks you know more."
"I do know more."
She pulled a small leather-bound Bible from the hidden pocket in her skirt and showed him the pages. Half of them had been cut out and replaced with thin sheets covered in her father's handwriting.
"My father kept records of every crooked deal Calhoun made. Wages stolen, deeds forged, land seized under fake debts, enough to hang him if it reaches a federal judge."
"And Calhoun knows. You have it."
"He shouldn't. I've kept it hidden since my father died."
"Then someone talked. Or someone saw. Either way, that contest rope didn't cut itself."
A shout rose from the fair behind them, and they both turned to see 3 men in railroad coats, pushing through the crowd, scanning faces. Calhoun stood at the center, pointing toward the livestock pavilion.
"Run."
They ran. The prairie stretched flat and merciless under the June sun, offering no cover except the tall grass that whipped at their legs. Isabella's skirt tangled around her boots, and she stumbled, Stephen caught her by the waist without breaking stride, steadying her as they veered toward a line of cottonwoods, marking a dry creek bed.
Can you ride?
Better than you.
Doubt that.
He pulled her down the embankment and into the shade of the trees, where 2 horses were tied to low branches. One was a sturdy paint mare, the other a rangy bay gelding.
You planned this.
I planned to leave before Calhoun saw me. You complicated that.
He untied the bay and swung up, then offered his hand.
I have my own horse at the livery.
And Calhoun's men are between you and the livery. Get up here or stay, and explain that Bible to them.
She took his hand and let him pull her up behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist as he kicked the bay into a gallop. The paint mare followed without a lead, trained to stay close. They burst out of the creek bed and onto the open prairie, the fair shrinking behind them as the sun climbed higher. Isabella felt the hard muscle of Stephen's back against her chest, the heat of his body cutting through the thin cotton of her dress, and she forced herself to focus on the horizon instead of the way her pulse jumped at the contact.
Where are we going?
My father's old claim, 5 miles west. There's a cabin.
If Calhoun knows about the Bible, he knows about the cabin.
Then we go there fast, get what I need, and leave before he arrives.
What do you need that's worth the risk?
Proof that the land auction tonight is rigged. My father recorded the real deed owners in the Bible. If Calhoun sells land that's already legally held, he's committing fraud in front of 50 witnesses.
And if we show up with that Bible, we're dead before we can speak.
So we don't show up. We send it.
She felt him shift in the saddle, considering.
You have someone you trust?
The county sheriff's deputy, Marcus Webb. He owes my father a debt.
Calhoun owns half the men in this county. How do you know Webb isn't one of them?
Because my father saved Webb's life when a horse threw him into a fence post. Webb's honest. Stubborn, but honest.
Stubborn's better than bought.
The bay's hooves pounded a steady rhythm, and the paint mare kept pace beside them. The prairie rolled out in waves of gold and green, the heat shimmer turning the horizon into a liquid line. Isabella's arms tightened around Stephen's waist as they crested a low rise, and she saw the cabin in the distance, a small dark shape against the pale grass.
There.
I see it.
He slowed the bay to a walk as they approached, his eyes scanning the area for signs of movement. The cabin sat alone, its door hanging open, the windows dark.
That door wasn't open when your father left it.
How would you know?
Because I rode out here 2 months ago to see if you needed help after he died. You weren't here. The door was shut.
She slid off the horse before he could stop her, landing hard and stumbling forward. He was off the bay in a heartbeat, catching her arm.
Wait.
It's my cabin.
It's a trap.
He pulled her back toward the horses, but the sound of hoofbeats rose from the south, fast and close. 3 riders crested the ridge, Calhoun in the lead, his gold tooth flashing as he grinned.
Inside. Now.
They ran for the cabin, Stephen dragging her through the open door and slamming it shut behind them. The interior was dim and hot, smelling of old wood and dust. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot, a cold stove. No other exit.
We're trapped.
Not yet.
He shoved the table against the door and grabbed one of the chairs, jamming it under the handle. Outside, the hoofbeats stopped.
How many bullets you got?
I don't carry a gun.
Of course you don't.
He pulled a revolver from his belt and checked the cylinder.
6 shots. 3 men. This'll be close.
Wait.
She moved to the window and peered through the gap in the shutters. Calhoun sat on his horse in the yard, flanked by his 2 hired men, but none of them had drawn weapons. Calhoun's smile widened, gold tooth glinting.
He's not here to shoot us.
Then why's he here?
To make a deal.
She opened the shutter an inch and called out.
What do you want, Calhoun?
His voice carried across the yard, smooth and easy.
Just a conversation, Miss Bennett. You and I both know your father left you something valuable. I'm prepared to pay for it. Handsomely.
I'm not selling.
Then perhaps you'll trade. That young man in there with you, for instance. Stephen Pierce. I hear he's been turning down marriage offers from settler families all year. Funny thing is, your uncle offered him your hand just last month as part of a land deal, and Pierce refused. Said he wouldn't treat a woman like livestock.
Isabella's breath caught. She turned to look at Stephen, who met her eyes without flinching.
He's lying.
Is he?
About the refusing part. No. About the reason. Maybe. I didn't refuse because I thought you were livestock. I refused because I don't make promises I can't keep. And marrying a woman I've never met to settle a land debt isn't a promise. It's a transaction.
Outside, Calhoun's laugh rang out.
Touching. But it doesn't change the fact that you're trapped in that cabin, with no water, no food, and no way out. Give me the Bible, and I'll let you both right away. Keep it, and I'll burn the cabin with you inside.
He's bluffing.
He's not.
Stephen moved to the other window and looked out.
He's got kerosene. 2 cans.
Then we fight.
With what? I've got 6 bullets, and you've got a Bible. He's got 3 armed men and fire.
So what do you suggest?
We give him the Bible.
Absolutely not.
Hear me out. We give him a Bible. Not the one with the records.
She stared at him.
I don't have another Bible.
But you have paper, ink, and time. Enough to fake a few pages and make him think he's won.
He'll check it.
Not if we make him chase us for it.
He crossed to the cot and pulled the thin mattress aside, revealing a trapdoor in the floor.
Roof access through the crawl space. I saw it when I checked the cabin 2 months ago. We go up, drop the fake Bible in the yard, and run while he's reading it.
That's insane.
You have a better idea?
She didn't. She pulled the Bible from her pocket and opened it to a blank page her father had left at the back, then grabbed a pencil stub from the table drawer. Her hands shook as she copied a few lines of her father's handwriting, changing the names and dates to make them useless. Stephen watched the yard through the window, his jaw tight.
Calhoun's getting impatient. He's sending one of his men toward the cabin with a can.
Almost done.
She scrawled 2 more lines, then closed the Bible and tucked it into her shawl.
This won't fool him for long.
It doesn't have to. Just long enough for us to reach the ridge.
He pulled the trapdoor open and gestured for her to go first. She dropped into the crawl space, landing in soft dirt, and he followed, pulling the door shut above them. The space was narrow and dark, lit only by thin shafts of sunlight through gaps in the floorboards. Stephen crawled forward, moving toward the back of the cabin, and Isabella followed, the Bible pressed against her chest. They reached a second trapdoor, and Stephen pushed it open, revealing a ladder leading up to the roof.
Quiet.
They climbed, boots scraping softly on the rungs, and emerged onto the flat roof of the cabin. The sun hit them like a hammer, and Isabella blinked against the glare. Below, Calhoun's man was pouring kerosene along the base of the front wall.
Now.
Stephen took the Bible from her hands and threw it hard into the yard, away from the kerosene. It hit the dirt with a thud, and Calhoun's head snapped toward it.
Move.
They ran across the roof to the back edge and jumped, landing in the tall grass behind the cabin. The impact jolted through Isabella's legs, and she bit back a gasp. Stephen grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the horses, which had wandered to graze near the tree line. Behind them, Calhoun shouted, and boots pounded on the cabin floor.
They're inside. We've got 30 seconds.
They reached the horses and swung up, Stephen on the bay, Isabella on the paint mare. The mare danced sideways, startled, and Isabella fought to keep her seat. Stephen reached over and caught the mare's bridle, steadying her.
Easy. She'll settle.
I'm fine. Go.
They kicked the horses into a gallop, racing for the ridge as gunfire cracked behind them. A bullet whined past Isabella's ear, and she ducked low over the mare's neck, her heart hammering. The ridge loomed ahead, and they plunged over it, the ground dropping away into a shallow ravine. The horses skidded down the slope, hooves scrambling for purchase, and they hit the bottom hard. Stephen pulled the bay to a halt and turned to check behind them.
They're not following.
Why not?
Because Calhoun's busy reading your fake Bible, and when he figures out it's fake, he'll head straight for the auction to make sure no one else gets a copy of the real one.
Then, we need to get to Deputy Webb before Calhoun does.
Webb's at the auction. It starts in 2 hours.
Then, we ride.
They climbed out of the ravine and turned east toward Dry Creek. The sun was past its peak now, angling toward late afternoon, and the heat pressed down like a wool blanket. Isabella's dress clung to her back, and her braid had come half undone, hair sticking to her neck. She glanced at Stephen, who rode beside her with his hat pulled low, his expression unreadable.
You really turned down my uncle's offer because you didn't want to make a promise you couldn't keep?
That's what I said.
But not the whole truth.
No.
He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. They rode in silence for a mile, the only sound the steady rhythm of hooves and the wind in the grass. Then Stephen spoke again, his voice low.
I turned it down because I'd seen you once, from a distance, and I knew if I married you as part of a deal, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if you'd have chosen me without it.
Isabella's breath caught. She turned to look at him, but he kept his eyes on the horizon.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Probably.
Also the most honest.
Also probably.
She felt a smile tug at her lips despite the danger, despite the heat, despite everything.
For the record, I would have said no too. Not because I didn't want to marry you. Because I didn't want to be traded like a horse.
Good to know. We're both idiots.
Agreed.
They crested another rise, and Dry Creek came into view, a cluster of buildings huddled along the railroad line. Smoke rose from the blacksmith's forge, and a water tower cast a long shadow across the main street. The auction platform stood at the center of town, already surrounded by wagons and men in work clothes.
There's Webb.
He pointed to a man in a deputy's coat, standing near the platform, talking to a rancher.
How do we get the real Bible to him without Calhoun seeing?
We don't. We send someone else.
Who?
That kid, selling lemonade.
He gestured to a young man with a crate of tin cups near the edge of the crowd.
Give him a nickel and a message. He'll deliver it.
And if Calhoun sees him?
Then, we improvise.
They rode into town slowly, keeping to the side streets, and dismounted behind the general store. Isabella pulled the real Bible from her pocket and wrapped it in her shawl, then handed Stephen a nickel from her coin purse.
Tell him to give it to Deputy Webb and say it's from Bennett.
What if Webb doesn't believe him?
He'll believe the Bible. My father's handwriting is unmistakable.
Stephen crossed to the lemonade stand and spoke to the kid in low tones, pressing the nickel and the wrapped Bible into his hands. The kid nodded and walked toward Webb, weaving through the crowd. Isabella held her breath, watching from the shadows. The kid reached Webb and handed him the bundle, speaking quickly. Webb's face went still, then sharp. He unwrapped the shawl, opened the Bible, and read.
He sees it.
So does Calhoun.
Calhoun was pushing through the crowd toward Webb, his gold tooth flashing, his face twisted with rage. Webb saw him coming and stepped up onto the platform, holding the Bible high.
Webb, don't be a fool. That Bible is stolen property.
Webb's voice cut across the crowd, calm and clear.
This Bible contains evidence of fraud, wage theft, and land seizure. Graves Calhoun, you're under arrest.
Calhoun stopped in his tracks, his hand moving toward his coat. Stephen drew his revolver and stepped out of the shadows, Isabella beside him.
Don't.
Calhoun's eyes found them, and his smile returned, cold and sharp.
You think Webb can protect you? You think that Bible means anything? I own half the judges in this territory.
But you don't own the federal marshal in Omaha.
Isabella's voice rang out, steady and strong.
And Deputy Webb just sent a telegram to the marshal's office with a full summary of your crimes. You're done, Calhoun.
Calhoun's smile faltered. He looked around the crowd, seeing the faces of the ranchers and settlers he'd cheated, the men whose wages he'd stolen, the families whose land he'd taken. No one moved to help him. Webb climbed down from the platform and crossed to Calhoun, pulling iron cuffs from his belt.
Graves Calhoun, you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent.
Calhoun jerked away, but two ranchers stepped forward and grabbed his arms, holding him fast. Webb cuffed him and led him toward the jail, the crowd parting to let them through. Isabella felt her knees go weak, and Stephen caught her by the waist, holding her steady.
You all right?
I think so.
You think?
I'm not used to almost dying twice in one day.
You did fine. Better than fine.
She looked up at him, and his eyes were warm. His mouth quirked in a half smile.
You're still holding me.
I know.
You planning to let go?
Not unless you ask.
She didn't ask. The crowd began to disperse, the auction forgotten, and the sun dropped lower, painting the street in gold. Stephen released her waist but took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers.
We should talk.
About what?
About the fact that I just spent the whole day trying not to get you killed, and somewhere in the middle of it I realized I'd do it again tomorrow, and every day after, if it meant staying close to you.
Her heart kicked hard against her ribs.
That's a terrible reason to court someone.
What's a good reason?
I don't know. Common sense? Shared goals? Mutual respect?
We've got all three.
We've known each other for 6 hours.
Longest 6 hours of my life.
She laughed, the sound shaky but real.
You're insane.
Probably. But I'm also right.
He tugged her hand gently, pulling her toward the edge of town where the horses waited. The street was emptying now, families heading home, the day's excitement fading into evening. They reached the horses and stood in the shade of the water tower, the heat finally easing as the sun touched the horizon.
What happens now?
Now Webb locks up Calhoun. The marshal comes from Omaha, and your father's records put a railroad thief in prison.
And us?
That depends.
On what?
On whether you still think marrying someone you've known for 6 hours is insane.
She stared at him.
Are you proposing?
Not yet. But I'm saying if I did, 6 months from now, or a year from now, I'd mean every word. And I'd spend every day between now and then proving I'm worth the risk.
Her throat tightened. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw.
You already are.
He leaned down and kissed her, slow and careful, his hands framing her face. The world narrowed to the warmth of his mouth, the strength of his hands, the way her pulse jumped and steadied all at once. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, and his voice was rough.
I'm not letting you out of my sight.
Good. Because I wasn't planning to leave.
They stood there as the sun set, the prairie turning gold and orange, and finally purple. The first stars pricking the sky. The horses grazed nearby, and the town settled into evening quiet. Stephen kissed her again, deeper this time, and she kissed him back with all the reckless hope she'd been holding in since the moment he'd caught her at the fair. The next morning, Isabella woke in the boarding house room she'd rented after her father died, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. She dressed quickly and walked to the jail, where Webb met her on the steps.
Marshall's coming tomorrow. Calhoun's not talking, but the Bible's enough to convict.
Good.
There's more. Calhoun's partners are scrambling. One of them, a man named Trask, left town last night with a saddlebag full of stolen deeds. He's headed for the state line.
Can you stop him?
Not alone. I've only got one deputy, and he's watching Calhoun.
Then I'm going with you.
Stephen was waiting outside, leaning against the hitching post with his arms crossed. When he saw her, he straightened and walked over.
Heard about Trask. Webb's going after him.
I know. I told him I'd go too.
Then so am I.
Webb frowned.
This isn't your fight, Pierce. It is now.
They rode out within the hour, 3 horses pushing hard across the open prairie. The sun climbed fast, turning the air thick and hot. Isabella's dress clung to her back, and dust coated her throat. Stephen rode beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. Webb took point, following the trail Trask had left, deep hoofprints heading northeast toward the river crossing. By midday, they spotted him. A lone rider on a dark horse, moving fast through the scrub brush near the ford. Webb spurred his mount forward, and Isabella followed, Stephen close behind. Trask looked back, saw them, and kicked his horse into a gallop. The chase was on. They thundered through the brush, branches whipping past. Trask cut toward the river, where the ford was shallow but treacherous with loose stones. He splashed into the water, and his horse stumbled. He yanked it upright and kept going. Webb reached the bank first and plunged in. Isabella followed, her horse slipping on the slick rocks. Stephen grabbed her reins and steadied her mount, his voice calm.
Easy. Let him find his footing.
They crossed together, water spraying around them. On the far bank, Trask was climbing a rocky slope toward a stand of cottonwoods. Webb fired a warning shot, and Trask ducked, but didn't stop. Isabella's heart pounded. She urged her horse up the slope, Stephen right beside her. At the top, Trask dismounted and ran into the trees, abandoning his horse. Webb swung down and gave chase on foot. Isabella and Stephen followed. The cottonwood grove was dense and shadowed, the air cooler but still heavy. Trask crashed through the underbrush, his boots loud on the dry leaves. Webb was faster, closing the gap. Isabella saw Trask reach for his belt and pull a pistol. She shouted a warning.
Webb, he's armed.
Webb dropped and rolled behind a tree as Trask fired. The shot went wide. Stephen pulled Isabella down behind a fallen log, his body shielding hers. His breath was hot against her ear.
Stay low.
She nodded, her pulse racing. Trask fired again, and bark exploded from the tree above Webb's head. Webb returned fire, and Trask yelped and stumbled back, dropping his gun. Stephen surged forward and tackled him before he could recover. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dirt. Trask swung a fist, but Stephen blocked it and pinned him, one knee on his chest. Webb ran up and yanked Trask's arms behind his back, locking irons on his wrists.
Got him.
Isabella stood, brushing leaves from her dress. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them steady. Stephen rose and walked over, his eyes searching hers.
You all right?
Yes. Are you?
Always am. When you're close.
She smiled despite herself. Webb hauled Trask to his feet and retrieved the saddlebag from the abandoned horse. Inside were dozens of deeds, all signed over under duress. He shook his head.
Calhoun's whole operation. This, he'll bury him.
They rode back to Dry Creek in the late afternoon, Trask tied to his saddle and silent. The town was waiting. Word had spread, and a small crowd gathered outside the jail as Webb locked Trask in the cell next to Calhoun. Calhoun's face went pale when he saw the saddlebag. His gold tooth gleamed as he forced a tight smile. Marshall arrives tomorrow. Both of you will stand trial. The crowd murmured approval. Isabella felt the weight lift from her shoulders. It was over. She walked outside and Stephen was there, waiting by the horses. He offered his hand, and she took it. They walked down the street together, away from the noise and the crowd, toward the edge of town where the prairie opened up wide and quiet. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Stephen stopped and turned to face her.
There's something I need to say.
What?
I didn't refuse your father's offer because I didn't want you. I refused it because I wanted you to choose me. Not because of a deal or a debt or anything else. Just because you wanted to.
Her eyes stung. She stepped closer and took both his hands.
I choose you. I chose you the moment you caught me at the fair. I just didn't know it yet.
Then marry me. Not because anyone says you should. Because you want to.
Yes.
He pulled her close and kissed her, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on tight. When they finally broke apart, he was grinning.
That was easier than I expected.
Don't get used to it.
Wouldn't dream of it.
They walked back toward town as the stars began to appear, fingers interlaced, the future stretching out before them like the open prairie. The next week passed in a blur. The marshal came and took Calhoun and Trask to the state capitol for trial. The stolen deeds were returned to their rightful owners, and the railroad agent who'd been working with Calhoun was fired and run out of town. Isabella sold her father's claim to a young family from Kansas and used the money to buy a small trading post on the edge of town. Stephen helped her set it up, building shelves and painting the sign. They worked side by side every day, falling into an easy rhythm. On the fourth day, as they were arranging goods on the counter, a group of riders came into town. Isabella recognized the lead rider immediately, her cousin, a Choctaw trader from the Southern Territories. He dismounted and embraced her, then looked at Stephen with open curiosity. "He's with me." "Stephen Pierce." Her cousin nodded and extended his hand. Stephen shook it. "She told me about you. You're the one who helped her take down Calhoun."
We did it together.
Good answer. They shared a meal that night, and Isabella's cousin brought news from home. Her mother was well. Her brothers were planning to visit in the fall. The family had heard about the fight and were proud. Isabella felt something settle inside her, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since her father died. Stephen sat beside her, his hand resting on her knee under the table, steady and warm. The next morning, her cousin left, and Isabella stood with Stephen on the porch of the trading post, watching the riders disappear into the distance.
You miss them.
I do, but I'm where I need to be.
With me?
With you.
He kissed her temple, and she leaned into him. The county fair was coming up again, and the town was already buzzing with preparations. This time, Isabella planned to enter the shooting contest legitimately. Stephen had been teaching her trick shots every evening, and she was getting good. On the day of the fair, they walked to the grounds together, the air thick with the smell of roasted corn and fried dough. The shooting contest was held in the afternoon, and a crowd gathered to watch. Isabella stepped up to the line, rifle in hand. Stephen stood off to the side, arms crossed, a small smile playing on his lips. The targets were set at 50 yards. She took a breath, sighted, and fired. The first target shattered. The crowd cheered. She reloaded and fired again. The second target exploded. By the fifth shot, the crowd was roaring. She hit every target clean. The judge, a grizzled rancher named Mills, shook her hand and presented her with the prize, a hand-tooled leather gun belt. Best shooting I've seen in 10 years.
Thank you.
Stephen walked over and slung an arm around her shoulders.
Told you.
You're insufferable.
And you love it.
She did. They wandered through the fair, eating corn and watching the horse races. As the sun began to set, they found themselves near the dance pavilion, where a fiddler was tuning up for the evening. Stephen pulled her toward the platform.
I don't dance.
You do now.
He took her hand and led her onto the floor. The music started, a lively reel, and he spun her into the steps. She stumbled at first, laughing, but he steadied her and guided her through the rhythm. They danced until the music slowed, and then he pulled her close. one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. The pavilion was crowded, but it felt like they were the only two people there.
I meant what I said. I want to marry you.
I know.
Soon.
How soon?
Next week.
That's fast.
I've waited long enough.
She looked up at him, her heart full.
Next week, then.
He kissed her, slow and sweet, and the crowd around them faded into nothing. They were married the following Saturday in the small church at the edge of town. Isabella wore a simple white dress she'd bought from the general store, and Stephen wore a new vest and his best hat. Webb stood as witness, and half the town showed up to watch. The preacher kept it short, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Stephen kissed her with enough enthusiasm to make the crowd laugh and cheer. Afterward, there was a reception in the town square, with food and music and dancing. Isabella's trading post partner, a widow named Mrs. Hale, had baked 3 pies. Webb brought a cask of cider. The fiddler played until his fingers cramped. As the night wore on, the crowd thinned, and Isabella found herself standing with Stephen near the edge of the square, watching the last of the guests drift away.
You tired?
A little.
Want to go home?
Home. The word felt new and perfect. They'd moved into a small cabin just outside town, a place with a good well and a view of the prairie. Stephen had built a porch swing, and Isabella had planted flowers in the yard. It was theirs.
Yes. Let's go home.
They walked hand in hand through the quiet streets, the stars bright overhead. When they reached the cabin, Stephen lifted her over the threshold, and she laughed and clung to his shoulders. He set her down gently inside, and she turned to face him, her heart so full it ached.
I love you.
I love you too.
He kissed her, and she kissed him back, and the door swung shut behind them. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Isabella's life. She ran the trading post with Stephen's help, and business was good. The town was growing, and new families were arriving every week. The railroad agent who replaced Calhoun was honest and fair, and the stolen land was finally being returned to its rightful owners. One evening in late July, Isabella and Stephen were sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset. The air was warm and still, the prairie humming with crickets. Stephen had his arm around her, and she rested her head on his shoulder.
I've been thinking.
About what?
We should take a trip. See your family.
You'd do that?
Of course. They're your family. That makes them mine too.
Her throat tightened. She turned and kissed him, soft and lingering.
Thank you.
For what?
For choosing me.
Every day.
They sat there until the stars came out, wrapped in each other in the warm summer night. The future was wide open, full of promise and possibility. And they would face it together, side by side. Always the next morning brought trouble in the form of dust on the horizon. Isabella was sweeping the porch when she spotted the riders, 3 of them, coming fast from the north. Stephen stepped out of the barn, his hand already on his rifle.
Stay inside.
Not a chance.
He didn't argue. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, and Isabella recognized the leader immediately. It was Trask, Calhoun's partner, the one who'd escaped with the stolen deeds. He was a lean man, with a scarred face and cold eyes. He smiled when he saw them, showing yellow teeth.
You're trespassing.
Trask spat in the dust.
I came for what's mine. Calhoun had something that belongs to me. Calhoun's in prison. Whatever he had is evidence now.
Trask's smile widened.
The Bible. I want the Bible.
Why? The deeds are already with the marshal.
Trask's expression darkened.
There's more in that Bible than deeds, girl. Pages that could hang me. I'm not leaving without it.
Stephen raised the rifle, calm and steady.
You're leaving now.
Trask's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their guns. The moment stretched tight and thin. Then Trask laughed, sharp and ugly.
Have it your way.
He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. But the threat hung in the air like smoke. Isabella's heart was pounding.
He'll come back.
I know. We need help.
They rode into town within the hour. Webb was in his office, going through paperwork. When Stephen explained, the deputy's face hardened.
Trask is wanted in 3 territories. If he's here, we need to take him now. He's got at least 2 men with him. Maybe more. I'll deputize you. We'll need every gun.
I'm coming too.
Isabella. No.
He threatened me. He knows where we live. I'm not sitting this out.
Stephen looked at Webb, who shrugged.
She's got a right. And we need the numbers.
Stephen's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They spent the next hour preparing. Webb gave Isabella a revolver and showed her how to load it. Stephen stayed close, his hand brushing hers every few minutes. A silent reassurance. By mid-afternoon, they had a plan. Trask and his men were camped at an abandoned homestead east of town. A place with good cover and a clear view of the road. Webb wanted to surround them and force a surrender, but Stephen shook his head.
They'll fight. We need to draw them out.
How?
Bait. Me and Isabella.
Webb frowned.
That's risky. It's the only way. They want the Bible. We'll let them think they can take it.
Isabella's stomach twisted, but she nodded. They rode out an hour before sunset, just the 2 of them, moving slowly along the road. Stephen had the Bible wrapped in cloth and tied to his saddle. Isabella stayed close, her hand on the revolver at her hip. The abandoned homestead came into view, a cluster of sagging buildings and broken fences. Stephen pulled up and dismounted, his movements deliberate and unhurried.
Stay on your horse. If this goes bad, you ride.
I'm not leaving you.
Isabella.
No.
He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. They stood there, waiting, the sun sinking low and painting the prairie orange and gold. Then the door of the largest building swung open, and Trask stepped out, flanked by his men. He was grinning.
Smart move, bringing it to me. The Bible's yours. Let us go, and you'll never see us again.
Trask walked closer, his hand on his gun.
I don't think so. You've seen too much. Both of you.
Stephen's hand moved, fast and smooth, and the rifle was up before Trask could blink. At the same moment, Webb and his men rose from cover behind the buildings, guns drawn. Trask froze, his grin fading.
Drop your weapons.
For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then one of Trask's men made a grab for his gun, and everything exploded into noise and motion. Stephen pulled Isabella down behind the horses as bullets whipped past. She fired twice, her hands shaking, and saw one of Trask's men stagger and drop his gun. Webb's posse returned fire, and the air filled with smoke and dust. Trask was running for the barn, weaving and ducking. Stephen took aim and fired, and Trask went down hard, clutching his leg. His men threw down their weapons and raised their hands. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella's ears were ringing, her heart hammering. Stephen pulled her to her feet, his hands checking her over, his eyes wild.
Are you hurt?
No. Are you?
No.
He pulled her close and held her tight, his breath ragged against her hair. Webb and his men moved in to secure the prisoners. Trask was cursing and bleeding, but he'd live. The Bible was still tied to Stephen's saddle, untouched. It was over. They rode back to town as the stars came out, and by the time they reached the cabin, Isabella was so tired she could barely stand. Stephen helped her down and led her inside, his arm around her waist. He poured water and made her drink, then sat her down on the bed and knelt in front of her, his hands on her knees.
You were incredible.
I was terrified.
So was I.
You didn't look it.
I'm good at hiding it.
She smiled, her eyes stinging. He stood and kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her mouth, slow and tender. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on.
I'm never letting you walk into danger again.
Yes, you will. Because we're partners.
Partners.
Always.
He smiled against her lips.
Always.
The following week, the marshal came through and took Trask and his men to stand trial. The stolen deeds were returned, and the families who'd been cheated finally got their land back. Calhoun was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The town celebrated with a dance at the church hall, and Isabella wore a new dress, pale yellow with lace at the collar. Stephen wore a clean shirt and his best vest, and when he took her hand for the first waltz, she felt like she was floating. The music was bright and joyful, and the hall was full of laughter and light. They danced every dance, and when the fiddle player took a break, Stephen pulled her outside into the warm summer night. They walked to the edge of town, where the prairie stretched out under the stars. He stopped and turned to face her, his hands on her waist.
Marry me.
Her breath caught.
What?
Marry me. Not because of a deal. Not because anyone said so. Because I love you. Because I can't imagine my life without you.
Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she laughed and nodded, her hands gripping his shirt.
Yes. Yes. I'll marry you.
He kissed her, deep and fierce, and she kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally pulled apart, he was smiling, and so was she.
We'll build a good life. You and me.
We already have.
He laughed and spun her around, and she shrieked and clung to him, dizzy and breathless and happier than she'd ever been. They walked back to the hall hand in hand, and when they stepped inside, the fiddler struck up a new tune, fast and lively. Stephen pulled her into the dance, and they spun and laughed and held each other close as the night went on. Later, when the music finally ended and the hall emptied, Stephen and Isabella stood alone in the quiet space, the lanterns burning low. He took her hand and led her to the center of the floor, and they swayed together, No music, just the sound of their breathing and the creak of the floorboards. She rested her head on his chest and closed her eyes.
I was so angry when my father made that deal.
I know.
I thought you'd treat me like property.
I never would.
I know that now.
He kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her.
I didn't want a bargain. I wanted you.
You have me.
And you have me. Every part.
She looked up at him, her eyes shining.
Promise me, we'll always be this honest.
I promise.
Even when it's hard.
Especially then.
She smiled and kissed him, soft and lingering. They stood there in the empty hall, holding each other, the night warm and still around them. Outside, the stars blazed, and the prairie sang with crickets. Inside, two people who'd found each other against all odds finally spoke the truth out loud. They were home. They were together. And they always would be.